That's the difference between investing and speculation. Let me give you a concrete example. I bought my first stock when I was 11 years old. It was Cities Service Preferred. Cost me $38 a share. Now, was I buying it because I hoped some greater fool would pay me $50? No. I was buying it because the company was paying dividends, and I calculated that those dividends, reinvested over time, would make me money. That's investing. Or take Berkshire Hathaway's investment in Coca-Cola. We bought that in 1988. Why? Because Coca-Cola produces a product that billions of people want to consume. It has incredible brand value. It generates consistent cash flow year after year. Every year, people drink more Coca-Cola, and the company makes more profit. We're collecting hundreds of millions in dividends from that investment. That's a productive asset. Now let's talk about Bitcoin. What does Bitcoin produce? Nothing. Zero. It sits there. It doesn't manufacture anything. It doesn't provide a service. It doesn't innovate. It doesn't employ workers creating value. You buy Bitcoin today for $100,000, and you're hoping that tomorrow, next month, or next year, someone will pay you $110,000 or $200,000 or $1 million for it. But the Bitcoin itself hasn't generated a penny of value in the interim. This is what I tried to explain back at our 2022 shareholder meeting when I said I wouldn't pay $25 for all the Bitcoin in the world. People misunderstood that. They thought I was saying Bitcoin would go to zero. That's not what I meant. What I meant was, what would I do with it? I'd have to sell it back to you to realize any value because the Bitcoin itself doesn't produce anything. Compare that to farmland. If you offered me 1% of all the farmland in the United States for $25 billion, I'd write you a check this afternoon. Why? Because that farmland is going to produce corn, soybeans, wheat, valuable crops that people need to eat. Every single year, I'm getting output that has value. The land isn't just sitting there. It's working for me. Or apartments. If you own an apartment building, tenants pay you rent every month. That's cash flow. You can use that cash flow to maintain the building, pay your mortgage, and pocket the rest. The building is producing income. That's what makes it an investment rather than speculation. Gold has the same problem as Bitcoin, and I've been consistent about this for decades. Gold has some industrial uses, sure, but mostly people buy gold hoping to sell it to someone else later for more money. If you took all the gold ever mined and melted it into a cube, it would be about 68 feet on each side. You could fit it in a baseball infield. At current prices, that cube is worth something like $18 trillion. Now, for that same $18 trillion, you could buy all the farmland in the United States. That's about 400 million acres, producing actual food, plus 16 ExxonMobils, and you'd still have about $1 trillion left over for walking around money. A century from now, the farmland will have produced enormous amounts of crops. ExxonMobil will have generated trillions in dividends and profits. And that gold cube, it'll be sitting there, exactly the same size, having produced nothing. Which would you rather own? Bitcoin is gold with a better marketing campaign. At least gold has been a recognized store of value for thousands of years. It's pretty, you can make jewelry out of it, and it doesn't corrode. Bitcoin is ones and zeros in a computer. The only reason it has value is because we collectively agree it has value. That's not intrinsic value, that's psychological value. I hear the counter-argument, but warn, the dollar's the same way. It's just paper that we collectively agree has value. True enough. But here's the critical difference. The United States government accepts dollars for taxes. It pays its employees in dollars. You can use dollars to settle any debt, public or private, because it's backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. Like it or not, That's a form of utility that creates baseline demand for dollars. Bitcoin has no such backing. No government is required to accept it. No business is required to take it. Its value is purely based on the next person in line being willing to pay more than you did. That's the definition of speculation, not investment. Now, the Bitcoin folks will say, but Warren, what about the technology? What about blockchain? And look, I'm not saying blockchain technology isn't interesting. It might very well revolutionize all sorts of things. Supply chains, medical records, property titles, you name it. But here's the thing. You don't need to own Bitcoin to benefit from blockchain technology. That's like saying you needed to own domain names to benefit from the internet. Most of those domain speculators lost everything. The real money was made by companies that used internet technology to deliver better products and services. Amazon, Google, Netflix. The same will be true with blockchain. The winners will be the companies that use this technology to improve their business models and deliver more value to customers. Maybe that's banks using blockchain to settle transactions faster. Maybe it's logistics companies tracking shipments more efficiently. Maybe it's healthcare companies managing patient records more securely. But owning Bitcoin doesn't give you exposure to those innovations. It just gives you exposure to Bitcoin's price going up or down based on sentiment. Here's another way to think about it. Let's say Bitcoin does hit $1 million. That would give it a market cap of roughly $20 trillion, assuming all 21 million coins are eventually mined. That's bigger than the entire GDP of the United States. For what? For a digital ledger that processes about 7 transactions per second? Visa processes 65,000 transactions per second. The practical utility doesn't justify anywhere near that valuation. The Bitcoin enthusiasts talk about network effects and first mover advantage. Fine. MySpace had first mover advantage in social networking. Where is it now? BlackBerry dominated smartphones before iPhone came along. Being first doesn't guarantee you'll be the winner, especially in technology where things move fast. And here's what really concerns me. The people buying Bitcoin today at $100,000 largely don't understand what they're buying. They're buying it because they've seen it go up. They're buying it because their neighbor made money on it. They're buying it because some celebrity endorsed it, or because they're afraid of missing out. That's not investing. That's gambling. And in my experience, when you're gambling with money you can't afford to lose, bad things happen. January 21st, 1980. I'm sitting in my office in Omaha watching the news, and gold has just hit $850 an ounce. The phone won't stop ringing. Everyone wants to know if they should buy more. It's going to 5,000, they tell me. The dollar is finished. Gold is the only real money. I heard the same certainty in their voices then that I hear when people talk about Bitcoin going to $1 million today. You know where gold went next? It collapsed 65% and didn't see $850 again for 28 years. The people calling me in 1980 lost fortunes, not because they were stupid, but because they confused a popular narrative with investment logic. And here's the thing that should terrify anyone holding Bitcoin right now. Those gold buyers had better reasons than you do. I remember this vividly. Serious people, not fringe characters, but respected investors, were saying gold was the only safe place to put your money. And you know what happened? Gold promptly lost 65% of its value over the next 2 years. It took 28 years for gold to get back to that 1980 peak. 28 years. If you'd bought at the top and held, you made nothing for nearly 3 decades, not adjusting for inflation. And in real inflation-adjusted terms, you lost a fortune. Meanwhile, if you'd put that same money into the S&P 500 in 1980, you'd have multiplied your money 13 times over by 2008. Or you could have bought farmland, collected rent, watched it appreciate, and done even better. The people who chased gold because they were scared lost out on one of the greatest bull markets in American history. The parallels to Bitcoin are eerie. People are scared about inflation. They're worried about government money printing. They want something that seems safe from manipulation. I understand the psychology, but the prescription is wrong. You don't protect yourself from inflation by buying non-productive assets that might crash 80%. You protect yourself by owning pieces of productive businesses that can raise their prices with inflation and maintain their earning power. Or let's talk about the dot-com bubble, since Bitcoin bulls love to compare themselves to the early internet. Yes, the internet turned out to be revolutionary. But you know what? Most internet stocks still went to zero. In March 2000, the NASDAQ peaked at 5,048. By October 2002, it had fallen to 1,114. That's a 78% decline. Companies that had been worth billions became worthless overnight. Pets.com spent $300 million on a Super Bowl ad and went bankrupt 9 months later. Webvan raised $375 million in its IPO and was liquidated within 2 years. eToys was valued at $8 billion at its peak and went bankrupt, with its domain name selling for $3.6 million. The vast majority of people who invested in internet stocks during the bubble lost everything. But here's the kicker. Even if you'd had perfect foresight and knew which companies would survive, you still could have lost money by paying too much. Cisco was a great company, one of the survivors. But if you bought Cisco stock at the peak in 2000, it took you 17 years just to break even. Amazon dropped 95% from its peak. It eventually became one of the most valuable companies on earth, but only if you had the stomach to hold through a 95% loss. This is what the Bitcoin bulls miss when they make the internet comparison. Yeah, maybe blockchain will be important. Maybe Bitcoin survives. But that doesn't mean buying it at $100,000 is a good idea. You can be right about the technology and still lose all your money by paying too much. And let's talk about the granddaddy of all bubbles, tulip mania in Holland in the 1630s. Now, historians debate how widespread this actually was, but the basic facts are clear. Tulip bulb prices went absolutely crazy. At the peak, a single bulb could cost more than a house. People were trading their farms, their businesses, everything they owned for tulip bulbs. And it was all based on the idea that someone else would pay even more tomorrow than you paid today. What were people's justifications? Tulips were beautiful. They were exotic, imported from Turkey. They had genuine aesthetic value. Owning rare tulips was a status symbol among the wealthy. The rare varieties were truly scarce. You couldn't just plant more of them overnight. Sound familiar? These are the same justifications people use for Bitcoin. It's beautiful in a digital way. It's exotic, cryptography. It's a status symbol. Look how tech-savvy I am. And it's truly scarce. Only 21 million ever. You know what happened to tulip bulbs? The bubble popped. Prices collapsed. The rare tulips that had been worth more than houses became worthless. And tulips themselves, they're still around. You can buy them at any garden store for a few bucks. They're nice flowers, but they're not an investment. Here's what I've learned watching bubbles over my lifetime. They all have certain characteristics in common. First, there's a grain of truth in the story. The internet really was revolutionary. Houses really were in limited supply in desirable areas before 2008. There really is something interesting about blockchain technology. Second, Prices rise fast enough that early adopters make quick money. This creates powerful FOMO, fear of missing out. Your brother-in-law bought Bitcoin at $10 and sold at $1,000. Your coworker put $1,000 in, and now it's worth $1,000, $20,000. You start feeling stupid for not buying earlier, so you jump in late. Third, there are seemingly sophisticated justifications for why this time is different. With the dot-com bubble, it was network effects and eyeballs and new economy thinking. With housing in 2006, it was they're not making any more land and location, location, location. With Bitcoin, it's blockchain technology and decentralized finance and sound money. Fourth, traditional metrics stop mattering. In the dot-com bubble, people said P/E ratios were outdated. In housing, people said price-to-rent ratios didn't matter anymore. With Bitcoin, people say concepts like earnings and cash flow are irrelevant because it's a store of value. When people start saying the old rules don't apply, that's your signal that we're in bubble territory. Fifth, and most importantly, the bubble always pops. Always. There has never been an exception in all of financial history. Prices that rose based on pure speculation, disconnected from any underlying productivity or cash flow, eventually fall back to earth. The only question is when and how far. Right now, Bitcoin is exhibiting all 5 characteristics. We've got the grain of truth. Blockchain is interesting. We've got the early adopters making quick money. All those stories of Bitcoin millionaires. We've got sophisticated sounding justifications. Digital gold. Hedge against inflation. Institutional adoption. We've got traditional metrics being dismissed as irrelevant. Who cares about cash flow from something that's digital gold? The only question is whether the pop has already happened or is still coming. Bitcoin's crashed before. In 2017, it went from under $1,000 to $20,000 in a year, then crashed 84% to $3,200. People who bought near the top in December 2017 had to wait 3 years just to break even. In 2021, it hit $69,000, then dropped 77% to under $16,000. That's not volatility. That's Russian roulette. And the people pushing it now at $100,000 are saying, this time it's different because institutions are involved. That's what they always say. You know what institutions bring to the table? More sophisticated ways to lose money. The 2008 financial crisis was caused by institutions, banks, insurance companies, ratings agencies, all convincing themselves that housing prices couldn't fall nationwide. Institutions aren't smarter than individual investors. They're just better at creating complex justifications for foolish behavior. And here's the really scary part. Bitcoin at $100,000 is much riskier than Bitcoin was at $100. At $100, you were buying a wild speculation that might go to zero or might go up 1,000 times. The risk-reward was asymmetric in an interesting way. At $100,000, you're buying something that would need to go to $1 million for a 10 times return, which the bulls insist is inevitable, but could still go to zero or drop 80% like it has twice before. The risk-reward now is terrible. You're risking most of your capital for the possibility of tripling or quadrupling your money if you time the peak perfectly. Let me tell you something I learned from Benjamin Graham, my teacher. The 3 most important words in investing are margin of safety. You want to buy things for less than they're worth. So even if you're wrong about your analysis, you still have a cushion. What's the margin of safety in Bitcoin at $100,000? There isn't one. You're